I'm not the house of cards that falls down easily. I'm strong enough to handle what you throw at me.
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I'm your host, Kristen Sunanta Walker. Just what are we going to discuss? The intimacy that is mental health. Let's continue to make it as comfortable as discussing brain health or heart health. This show has been on the air for several years, and we have amazing co-hosts. And then we created a network of podcasters on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com, a place where every possible facet of mental well-being can be talked about openly. My show, after several hundred interviews, the format is this: intimate, deep, funny, touching, sometimes uncomfortable, but always vulnerable conversations with interesting people. The goal is to have you, our listening family, many of you who have become my good friends, feel as though you are listening in on private conversations. Thank you for tuning in and becoming part of this amazing journey with me, and now with our network of podcasters. Just knowing this podcast might be helping any of you realize you are not alone on this journey called being a human being makes doing this podcast worth every second.
After all we promised we'd be cordial.
Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sunanta Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm really excited today to talk to Dr. Jed Baker. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tell our listeners a little bit about your background, and then I want to ask you about your app, because it's No More Meltdowns is, boy, we all need that. But first, tell our listeners a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah, well, I run something called the Social Skills Training Project in New Jersey. So we're an organization that serves primarily people with autism, but others as well with social and behavioral challenges. And we have 2 to 3 locations. I say a third because we have an affiliate that works with us. And we provide family therapy. We provide group therapy. We provide consults to schools, individual therapy, workshops, in-service trainings and such. So that's one of the hats I wear. So I do a lot of direct service with folks in my clinic, but then I also do a lot of lecturing and workshops on the topic of challenging behavior, anxiety, and social skills training, and I've written a number of books on the subject.
You've written
so
9
that's currently
9 books, right?
9 books. I don't count one because one's in German and I can't read it yet, although I think they translated it back into English. So, yeah.
That has to be interesting to see it and know, well, somewhere in there are things that I've written, but it's in a language that I can't read myself.
Well, it's interesting because I get to travel sometimes overseas too, and the need is just as great, yes. In faraway locations. And the interesting thing is wherever I go, it's really the same issues. It doesn't matter what language people are speaking. They're having some of the same challenges and struggles, both in terms of advocating for their clients and the individuals, with autism, advocating with schools, trying to help them be accepted in community, help them transition to adulthood and have jobs. It's the same issues everywhere. Right,
exactly. And there's such a prevalence of people being so uncomfortable, maybe out of their own embarrassment, or they feel embarrassed because they don't know what to do to de-escalate a situation. And I think where I'm coming from is I spent so much time with my grandmother, who was a foster grandparent, and she was always with kids that either had Down syndrome or autism or what have you at a hospital. So very early on, I was around these kids, and nothing that they did was strange to me because that's what I was around at a very young age. But I witnessed the public have a very difficult time with some of their behavior. Yeah. And I was actually more disturbed at how the public reacted to their behavior, because to me, they were just being who they were. The kids were just being who they were. So
sure,
that still, obviously happens today. And then we have the prevalence of the internet on top of it. So one of the things that I saw you'd written, I know it was a while ago, but it was about protecting those with autism from cyberbullying, internet predators, and scams. That looks like you wrote in 2013, but boy, how have you seen that change to today, 2018? It has to have changed.
Well, I think just the issues have become even more sort of exaggerated. The speed with which information travels so quickly, and the extent to which a lot of people's self-esteem sometimes rises and falls with how many likes or dislikes they have. I think people are more vulnerable than ever in that respect, especially some of our folks who might have a larger presence on the internet than they do sometimes face to face, because maybe it's easier socially to sort of go into a computer world for a bit. So they post a video or they post something and somebody says something horrible and crushing. But, you mentioned something before that I'd sort of like to touch on, this issue of shame and sort of escalation. And I feel like in many ways, one of the things I talk about in all my lectures and my books, particularly No More Meltdowns, is how parents and teachers and others can sort of manage their own behavior to sort of keep calm in a storm and de-escalate. We're all prone to be able to either make things better or make things worse. And when we're sort of defensive and reactive, sometimes we escalate the behavior, fighting fire with fire. And we enter into these like long protracted power struggles. And, part of managing ourselves, I think, is to some extent sort of managing that shame sometimes. I have tremendous respect in public if I see a parent, struggling to manage a youngster who might be having trouble regulating themselves, the youngsters trouble, regulating themselves and being somewhat disruptive in public. But if I see a parent calmly trying to manage that, I have incredible respect for that. I think it's very hard to do. And like you say, there are all these eyes watching, and then there's some people who don't get it and they're judgmental. But for everyone like that, there's maybe at least two or more who totally get it and are saying, yep, been there, done that, had kids, or I have a nephew with autism or a cousin, and I get it. And to be, to have this ability in the face of, being in public, youngsters melting down, and to calmly try to bring that youngster down, to a reasonable place, I have tremendous respect for. So I hope listeners out there know that. So for every sort of worry about a judgmental eye, there are these people who are totally with you and are rooting for you to be able to, keep it together for yourself, and understand if you lose it sometimes too, because we're all human.
You just never go to that store again.
Well, no, I think you.
Totally.
I think you do. Look, well, put it this way: I have two children, so I've written these books. One of them was No More Meltdowns, and I remember a story that the local bookstore in the town I lived in had like a window display of No More Meltdowns, and I was across the street at a pizza restaurant, and my kids started arguing over who's going to get to sit next to me when they were little. Now they're teenagers. They want to be as far from, they won't actually be seen with me in public. But when they were little, and they were literally getting into a physical fight. And I was sitting right in front of this big display, Dr. Jed Baker, No More Meltdowns. But in the end, I felt like, okay, you know what? It makes me accessible. Like if I talk to you about this and No More Meltdowns, I've lived it. It's just, I'm part of the human race, like the rest of us. So, we're all struggling to try to, manage these situations. And
it's so human. It's so very human. And I mean, same with me. My son, I was talking with a friend last night, and they were trying to figure out why her grandson was laughing a certain way. And it was because he was mimicking how grandma laughs. And it's very odd to hear it out of this baby. And people were getting a little bit disturbed at a restaurant, and we were laughing about, oh, well, it happens. I remember being on an airplane and my son screaming and sounding like it was like an ear bleed scream. It was like a dolphin high pitched scream. And people on the airplane were looking at me like, please throw them out the emergency exit. So we all have had those moments and we survived. But what you talk about, and what I love and what I'm hearing is getting through it with a measure of compassion and de-escalation and calmness is going to get you through that and your child through that way more than heightening to, DEFCON 1 over these things.
Yeah. Well, also, if you have a level of embarrassment about it, understand it says more about the person who's judging you than it does about you. It's really not about you. The person who is judgmental is probably judgmental about many things in their life, including themselves. It's probably harder to live in their skin.
Yes.
And if they are judgmental and critical in that way over, moments of challenge like that, unfortunately, we know what happens to people like that. People stop visiting them.
Right.
They get to a point and family doesn't come say hello to them anymore because they're hard to be around. So it's harder to be them. And I think if we know that, we just do what we know is going to be useful and help our kids and help our clients.
Such a good point. Thank you for putting it that way. This is true. So in terms of your app, when was that created and how did that help kind of change your ability to be able to work with people outside of the one-on-one environment or because when there's an app, it's right there readily available. So not everyone as a doctor takes that journey and takes that kind of a step. That had to be interesting for you and also to get the kind of data that you can get from an app.
Okay, well, let me back up a little bit. The app is a companion to the No More Meltdowns book.
Mm-hmm. The
No More Meltdowns book is a sort of quick read that I authored when I had my own kids, and I thought, wow, this is not easy day to day when you're exhausted and you can't escape. And it would be nice to have a quick map of the territory of what do we do to prevent sort of common meltdown moments. Meltdowns, I mean, sort of emotional hijackings, either sort of outward anger or inward anxiety and shutdowns. What do we do to prevent those issues? What are some of the common triggers? And so that in order to prevent problems and not just react to them, we have to answer that big question, why does it happen? And to understand why it happens, we need to sort of keep track of what those triggers are, the situations that in a repeat sort of way trigger off some of these difficult moments with our kids or our clients. So the app was a way of keeping track on a mobile device of those moments of difficult behavior and being able to track what the situation was when it occurred so you could begin to get a handle on what the triggers are. And it stores this information in your mobile device. You can upload it to a website called simtrend.com/No More Meltdowns. And it analyzes the data much in the way a sort of behavior analyst would analyze it to understand, it says something like, oh, when this particular behavior, yelling, pinching, and running out of the room occurs, 80% of the time it was when, and it might give you sort of what the associated trigger is. Say a kid didn't get what he wanted immediately, right? So if the issue is one about waiting or accepting no, it'll then direct you to the prevention plan on how to think about dealing with, teaching kids how to wait or accept no. So it kind of tells you what the trigger is, what the likely trigger is over time, and gives you some ideas about how to prevent those problems. Now, it is, you don't have to have the app to do that.
Right.
People used to keep a journal, a diary of when the problems occurred. Some people just try to keep it in memory, but it is a device, a way of facilitating sort of memory of what was going on. Because a lot of times you'll ask a parent or a teacher, when there was a challenging behavior, well, what was going on when that happened? I don't know. I was just paying attention after he hit the kid, and we don't always do the detective work to know what triggered it. We always pay attention after a difficult behavior occurred. So this kind of helps us figure out what the trigger points are.
I know, no one likes commercials, but seriously, folks, without the help from these organizations, we could not stay on the air. Please give a shout out to zencharts.com. If you're a mental health or addiction treatment center, you'll want to use their EHR. It's gorgeous, and they're just good people. And also MyGenetics, MyGenetx.com, because knowing your genetic code empowers your mental health treatment. And lastly, CopeNotes.com. We love getting positive messages right to our phones every day from Johnny Crowder. He's the lead singer of Prison, a heavy metal band sharing their music about suicide prevention, addiction recovery, and mental health. See, that was painless. Support them as they support us. Back to the show.
Well, it seems like it's also bringing you into having an active consciousness around your life, being mindful about what's happening. So there's so much fast pace going on that taking a step back, and I mean, I remember being a very young parent and just running around, not really very aware because I'm tested for time. I've got to work. My son is screaming, and there wasn't a lot of, okay, let's stop in the car and think about how this could go instead of how it might go.
No, I
And,
totally relate
you know,
totally relate to that. I always thought that if you ever stopped and really thought about being a parent, it would just be overwhelming. You're just in the moment all the time.
yes.
But what I, in my older age here, I don't know if some people call this midlife, but I'm post 50 now, and I am much more able to be okay with not knowing the answer, not knowing what to do in the moment, than perhaps I was when I came out of grad school. I came right out of grad school. If I didn't know what to do with a client or a kid, I thought, oh, that means I'm not good at this, and so maybe I should find another career.
Right.
Now I'm okay with, in the moment, just really not knowing why something's happening, because I have more faith now that, as ugly as this moment is, one, it'll pass, and two, eventually I'm going to have some inkling about why this happened. I'll get there. And so I think when you talk about mindfulness, that's sort of what it means, how it translates for me, is being able to be chill when someone else is not at all chill and escalating. Because if we escalate when they escalate, now we're in a power struggle. But if we can be chill, we can help someone else be chill, and then we can reflect on it later that day, after the fact, and think, okay, how do I prevent this from happening again? If this is the kind of thing that always happens when we go to the store, or always happens, when there's homework to do, or always happens when we turn off the TV and say, come to dinner, or, leave the park, or whatever it is, then we'll figure it out. We'll figure out how to get better outcome. And the research is actually pretty clear on this. When parents have hope that things can get better, when parents understand that it's not their kid doing this on purpose to manipulate you and drive you crazy, but maybe they lack some skills and they don't have a better way, even if they're doing it on purpose, it's because they don't have better skills yet. And when we understand, it's nobody's fault, there's just a sort of gap between the demands we're placing on that individual and their ability to cope with it. When we understand things in this way, we get better outcome. One of my colleagues, Mark Durand, former supervisor colleague, Mark Durand, wrote a book called Optimistic Parenting, and he looks at aggressive behavior among kids 3 to 6 years old with autism. So what's the best predictor of how aggressive or calm they'll be at home? And it wasn't previous aggression. It wasn't lack of language, which does lead to some, difficult behavior, because if you can't communicate, you get frustrated. But the best predictor of how calm or aggressive they would be was parental optimism. The extent to which parents believe they could change their child's behavior. It's a temporary issue. It's a specific skill issue that maybe we could teach. It's nobody's fault. There's a gap between the difficulty of the situation and their ability to cope. When you think of it this way, you now have a workable problem. But if you say to yourself the opposite, it's not temporary. This is just who my kid is, and they'll always be like this. And it's part of their personality, so it doesn't go away. And they're doing it on purpose to manipulate me. That can escalate things. That can make you feel hopeless, make you feel angry, or depressed. Yeah. And it just stirs things up in a negative way. So the first order of business I always work with parents and teachers is, first, I'm a salesperson of hope, number one.
I love
you have to do that first. Now, then you have to come in with the goods. You can't just give false hope. You have to instill hope, but then you have to come in with some strategies that really will improve the situation. But if you don't have hope first, there's no energy to fuel the work.
Yeah, and you already are exhausted. And, I remember my emotional reservoir was already nil. So adding anything else to that, was just an impossibility. But I was also a very young parent. The way that I handle little kids now, and even, kids that we work with that are autistic are so much more patience and understanding, much like what you said. You're older, you know you're going to get through this. Some things just aren't worth raising your blood pressure and your anxiety level about. And
Right.
also, working in a lot of situations that were stressful, doing volunteer work on a psych ward for 5 years certainly helped me just not take a lot of stuff personally, but that helps because age comes into play there and experience. For younger parents, you yourself don't have the maybe even, I was 18, so my brain wasn't even fully developed yet. And here I am trying to raise a child. So,
yeah. Well, also, if you're worried about what people think, sometimes people get caught up with a goal of compliance. Got to get this person to comply, where really the goal is, how do I help this person grow to be able to manage themselves over time? And, that takes a little bit more patience. It's kind of like, rather than giving someone a fish, teaching them how to fish. It's that concept,
Exactly.
So if we can educate people, then we don't have to necessarily fix the problem that moment. We're going for the longer term goal here of helping them figure out how to handle difficult situations better over time so that they can be a more independent, functioning person.
Absolutely. And you going on this journey with your child is going to teach you so much about you that's beneficial. So it's another great thing to realize as a parent. This isn't just going to help your child. It's going to help you with your life too.
Yeah. Well, and let me just say something I always say in my workshops too. One of the first things I say, I have people raise their hand. How many of us have ever made things worse? And when people are honest, we all raise our hands. Having the condition that I have, a pervasive chronic condition called parenthood, right? It doesn't really go away. I make things worse on a weekly basis, and yet then I figure out how to sort of repair that and make it better. And so if we all start with that place of like, it's just human not to do it perfectly, and to learn from it and to see the whole thing as a growth experience. It's not about, am I a good parent or a bad parent? It's just, okay, how am I going to learn today? How's this kid going to force me to grow today?
Right. Well, there's room for forgiveness in that. It's so black and white with the other mode of thinking. That's what's great about it. Well, thank you for taking the time to come on our show and tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your work. You
can go to one of two websites. The website my publisher set up is just my name, www.jedbaker.com. And it has some of our books and our workshops and such. And then my private practice my private practice website is called Social Skills Training Project.com. And that's to access our clinic here in New Jersey. But both will have resources on anxiety. I'm sorry we didn't really get to touch so much on anxiety treatment, but I'd be happy to come back sometime if you'd like.
Absolutely. I for our listeners, they all know that I'm regularly on a program called U2 America, and today the topic is anxiety. So I know it well because it's been my friend for a long time. But I thought, well, great, Dr. Baker knows a lot about that. We'll get into that. So I'm going to read a lot of your material before I get on and talk about it in front of 42 million households today.
Well, can I share one thing that I say to all my clients and my parents? I use some of the Marvel comic analogy. I talk about, we have these two parts of our brain, the Dr. Banner and the Incredible Hulk. Dr. Banner is our forebrain. The Incredible Hulk is that limbic system. And when threatened, the Incredible Hulk hijacks the rest of the brain. And it's our alarm system. It keeps us safe. It keeps us out of danger. But a lot of times we have false alarms. The Incredible Hulk comes out when not needed. And the Incredible Hulk can be either rageful and angry or just despondent and anxious. And what Dr. Banner is, in some ways, is the fact checker. The Incredible Hulk is sort of a worry propaganda channel that just spews out, well, the word we use now is fake news because everybody talks about that all the time now, fake news. So we have this worry channel in our brain, that's the Incredible Hulk spewing out worry. And so Dr. Banner is this sort of fact checker, and that's what cognitive behavior therapy is to help people be to think like scientists to counteract some of that worry so that they can gradually face whatever those false alarm fears are. So we talk a little bit about that in the book, as well as a lot of other things to bring down people's anxiety long enough to begin to just gradually face those fears. We create these little fear ladders to gradually face situations that are that really aren't dangerous, and so they can learn nothing bad will really happen. But you need a lot of scientific thinking and other ways to relax to be able to bear facing those situations.
Right, exactly. And preparedness, knowing that, okay, this is every time that this is going on every month. Let's say you're afraid of public speaking, or you're a new company. Since I've worked with so many CEOs, you're a new company and you have a panic attack every time payroll is coming near because you're a new company. So many of the CEOs that I would work with, we'd say, okay, well, that this is coming. Let's try to knock it down from 2 weeks of every month being in panic mode to 1 week, because you know it's coming, and you always make it. You have a history of success here behind you. And if you don't, you'll look at how you've strategized and lived so far, and you've come out on the other side. But a lot of times it's just learning how to manage it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a difference between planning and worry. It's good to plan. It's coming, do the work, but then that's what you can do. You can't control the outcome. You can only control the process. So, it's like a good sports analogy. I went to see a talk from one of the a baseball psychologist who was a psychologist to major leaguers. He said, you can only have a good up at bat. You can't worry. You can't control whether you're going to get a hit and the consequences of that. You stay in the majors or you go down to the minor. All you can control is how you swing that bat and look for a good pitch. And so it's focus on the process and not the outcome. Yeah,
exactly. Well, thank you again so much. This is going to help me today, so I appreciate that, and this will be great for a lot of our listeners.
Well, thanks for having me, Kristen. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thanks to our listeners again for another edition of Mental Health News Radio.
Sometimes I'm passive aggressive, but never without good intentions. I heat up and act on my emotions.
Thanks so much for listening to Mental Health News Radio. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and hundreds of other podcast apps. Or you can visit our website at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. If you have a question or would like to be a guest, become a podcaster on our network, or join the amazing organizations that help keep us on the air, please email us at info@mhnrnetwork.com. Get ready for that special goodbye from our resident therapy dog, Miles, and a special thanks to Emily Sohn for letting us use her incredible song, Cordial, for our podcast music. Listen to the full song on SoundCloud at emily.sonne.
Don't be surprised when I don't hate on you. After all, we promised we'd be cordial. Sometimes in you I can fight it.
Good boy.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see your practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.